Britain needed, in Disraeli's view, therefore, to assert itself more vigorously on the world stage, in a sense, as compensating for this clear loss of influence in Europe. And already in 1872, pursuing his mission of rallying the working classes, many of whom had been enfranchised on his initiative in the Reform Act of 1867 to the Conservative cause, rallying them round his cause, he declared that the working classes are proud of belonging to an imperial country and are resolved to maintain, if they can, their empire. And the need to divert working class discontent into patriotic activity became even stronger with the sharp economic downturn that happened in Britain, as in the rest of Europe, in 1873. Once he became Prime Minister the next year, Disraeli did all he could to bolster the British Empire at home and abroad. In 1875, he secured for Britain a controlling interest in the French-built Suez Canal, vital for communications with India. By the time his premiership came to an end in 1880, he'd mobilized British forces in Afghanistan and South Africa and played a leading role in the Congress of Berlin, designed to settle the Russo-Turkish conflict of 1875-8. And above all, in 1876, Disraeli persuaded Queen Victoria to assume the title Empress of India, offering her, as in this cartoon rendition comparing him to the villain Ebenezer from the pantomime Aladdin, a new crown for an old one. This was, in fact, motivated partly by his and the royal family's belief that Queen Victoria should have a title that outranked those of the various subordinate monarchs in the Indian subcontinent, and indeed partly by the feeling that her daughter, also called Victoria, who was married to the German Crown Prince and would one day become German Empress, should not outrank her mother either. Still, the move also signalled the growth of an imperialist enthusiasm in the 1870s, creating an almost unstoppable momentum to the acquisition of new colonies in the scramble for Africa in the following decade, a scramble which helped make the British Empire, shown in this hostile cartoon, the greatest the world had ever seen. Even Disraeli's rival Gladstone, ever the reluctant imperialist, was forced to occupy Egypt and send General Gordon on his ill-fated expedition to the Sudan and to continue the forward march of British imperialism in Afghanistan and South Africa by public and political opinion, though with an almost equal lack of success there too. Imperialism was even better suited to win over the working classes, as the Conservatives felt, and many, of course, more of the working classes enfranchised in the 1884 Reform Act. The demonstrations and disturbances in London in the mid-1880s, including major riots in which shop windows in the West End broken by angry dockers, underlined the need to substitute a new ideological cement for society in place of traditional habits of deference that obviously, in view of events such as this, no longer had much influence. The Empire, Cecil Rhodes was reported as saying in 1895, is a bread and butter question. If you want to avoid civil war, you must become imperialists. Empire, Rhodes thought, would bring concrete economic benefits to Britain that would improve the lot of the masses. But it was also an instrument of patriotic propaganda. If children grew up in ignorance of the Empire, warned a Liberal Prime Minister Rosebery in 1892, the Empire was doomed. Classrooms began displaying the world map with the British Empire proudly coloured in red. The new popular press played its part too. As the owner of the Daily Express proclaimed in 1900, our policy is patriotic, our faith is in the British Empire. And by this time, of course, jingoistic enthusiasm for the Boer War was rife in London. The Empire was being celebrated in popular stories by authors like G.A. Henty. writer with a colossal output. This is just a tiny sample of his books, almost all of which had some kind of patriotic narrative, many of which dealt with British history, not just, but these are the imperial ones. There were magazines like The Boy's Own Paper. There are even early films, one of which showed the bombardment of Mafeking during the Boer War that was actually shot on a home county's golf course. In his book, St. George for England, published in 1895, Henty declared, "The courage of our forefathers has created the greatest empire in the world. If this empire is ever lost, it will be by the cowardice of their descendants." And music hall songs now celebrated the British Empire. So join with me, all of you, while I sing Britannia's praise. Winifred Hare's Britannia's sons shall rule the world in 1897, the empire on whose shores the sun has cast no setting rays. Geography and history books now emphasise the might and extent of the British Empire. Or, as in Denham Harrison's musical ditty Another Little Patch of Red put it, he meant to have, in the 1890s again, he meant to have a pull, did young John Bull. He found he wouldn't do to lie abed. And this plucky little chap soon began to paint the map with an ever-growing patch of red. This, of course, connected here with the Boer War. History textbooks are rewritten in the 1880s and 90s to give more space to the empire. Criticism of dubious enterprises such as the Chinese Opium Wars, or shady characters like the corrupt Indian administrator Warren Hastings, now virtually disappeared from the textbooks. Along with all this went cheap, mass-produced prints and reproductions of imperial scenes. Most popular, of course, I think I've shown this before, George Joy's Gordon's Last Stand, as well as, of course, a kind of imperialist kitsch like biscuit tins or cigarette cards. These are cards which were put into cigarette packets to get children to start smoking them, which you could collect and put into an album. Many other items like imperial empire plates, for example. Schools began to celebrate Empire Day, marked by a parade through a centre of London. Empire Day quickly spread right across Britain and was of enormous importance and popularity. This in huge mass celebration in 1908, for example, is in Hartlepool. Organisations like the Boy Scouts were formed to raise a new generation for military service in the colonies. And by the eve of the First World War, empire was a central part of British national identity in a way that it had not been in the first half or even the middle decades of the 19th century. So it's a creation largely, particularly from the 1880s to the First World War. You can already see it beginning in the 70s, but it's the 80s when it really takes off.